Hey, Restores, Pastor Ryan. I'm so excited to be with you this week. We are going to be finishing off our series, The Questions of Jesus. And this week, we're going to talk about the question of love. In this moment, we're going to be looking at John chapter 21, verses 15 and 19. But before we get in there, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some love, right? It's a love songs, and there are songs written all the time about love, right? We have movies and books and plays on Broadway about love. But the one song I want you to think about, maybe you have heard it before, it's Do You Love Me by the Contours, and it was released in 1962, a big hit. And the song actually was written by Berry Gordy, and he wrote it and kind of earmarked it for the Temptations. Now, the Temptations, on the day it was supposed to be recorded, decided to go to a church to see some gospel singing groups. And so Barry is waiting at the studio, and instead of the Temptations showing up, the Contours showed up actually to record a different song. And Barry asked them if they would be willing to attempt and record his song. And so after a few tries of the song, Do You Love Me, they finally hit on exactly what Barry was wanting them and wanting it to sound like. Gordy later shared about getting the concept for the song and writing the song, and he said that it was easy for him because he could remember the days when he could never get the girls that he liked to dance with him because he couldn't dance. Thus, in the song, the reference, you broke my heart because I couldn't dance, you didn't even want me around, and now I'm back to let you know I can really shake them down. In the song, he talks about all these new dance moves that he can do, right? He talks about the mashed potato and the twist. And I wasn't around when this song came out, but I remember hearing about this song and listening to it on the radio, and now listening to it on iTunes and stuff like that, and finding it on YouTube and listening to this song. Now, I was never a dancer, and so I can relate to Barry. I can relate to him. I couldn't dance, and so it makes sense that no girls would want to dance with me. Now, if you look at me, you probably think to yourself, but Pastor Ryan, you look like you can dance. I mean, you look like you just got all of the moves. Well, I'm here to tell you I'm more like Elaine from Seinfeld when she dances and how I dance than I am Will Smith getting jiggy with it, right? But in the song, they asked over and over, now that I can dance, now that I can do the mashed potato and the twist, do you like it? Do you like me dancing? It has all these songs. He says, now that I can do these moves and these dances and this stuff, do you love me? Do you love me? Now, I don't know if Jesus danced like Elaine or Will Smith, but he did ask the question, do you love me? Let's read from John chapter 21, starting in verse 15. It says this, now when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, then take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify him. Then he said to Peter, follow me. See, what an interesting moment in the life of Jesus and his followers. But the focus here in this moment is Jesus and Peter. See, I want us to take a step back for a moment, kind of go back in the story of Jesus and the disciples and Jesus and Peter. You see, prior to this, obviously, we had his death and resurrection. And since his resurrection, Jesus has appeared to the disciples and his followers 3 other times. And so prior to that moment, we go back to his resurrection. Prior to that, we go back to his crucifixion. Prior to that, we go back to the moment when Jesus is standing in the courtyard being questioned for his trial. Prior to that, you go back to the Last Supper as they sit around the table with Jesus and the disciples and his followers. And at the table of the Last Supper, Jesus has this communion meal, right? He has this meal and he shares about the bread and the drink and the cup. And as he shares about this, he indicates that one of you at this table is going to betray me. And he says, the one who I share this cup with that dips the bread in the cup is the one who betrays me. And then shortly after that, as dinner is kind of changing tide, Jesus is sharing again about his death and resurrection. And he looks at Peter and says, and he looks at him and he says this, that you are going to deny me. You, Simon Peter, will deny me not once, but 3 times. Peter, like I would probably do if Jesus was sitting there and looked at me and told me that you're going to deny you even know me 3 times. Peter flat out denies it. Jesus calls him out and he says, you're going to do this. Matthew 26, 34 and 35, it says, Peter declares, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. See, often we like to give Peter a bad rap for speaking first and acting second, for getting his foot stuck in his mouth. But I can see myself declaring this too. I can see myself declaring to Jesus, you're wrong. You're flat out wrong. I would never deny you. Flash forward. Peter's in the courtyard. And as they're around the fire, 3 different times he is asked, he is told, really, you are one of the disciples, right? You followed Jesus. You followed him. No, that's not me. And 2 more times he declares this denial of Jesus of Nazareth. And the rooster crows. And I think in that instant, in that moment, Peter Peter had a flashback to the moment Jesus told him he was going to deny him. And I can only imagine in that moment of denial, his heart just fell out of his body. That everything he thought he stood on, that the love he had for his Messiah, his rabbi, that all the love that he thought he had for him, all of the strength that he had was suddenly gone. Now we flash forward to the beach. Jesus has called out to them at the boat. They've come in with this huge amount of fish, and they're eating the meal together. And as they are eating the meal together, they're probably talking and sharing. There has to be this heaviness in the air, and the passage actually shares right before this conversation between Peter and Jesus that the disciples didn't want to even ask, "Is it you, Jesus?" Right? They knew it was him, but they didn't even want to ask. There's a heaviness in the air, and I think there had to be for Peter in that moment this elephant in the room. You've ever had this experience? I have. When you know you have to talk to somebody, have a conversation, and you have this sinking, sick to your stomach feeling. And you greet each other, you're kind of in the same room, you're talking, and you just know there is a conversation that has to happen, and your stomach is just kind of in knots, right? Your stomach is just sinking in knots, and just, you know you have to have this conversation. And Peter probably knew, and at some point I need to talk about this denial moment. And they ate. And they probably talked. The meal is done. People around the fire have probably relaxed a little bit. Maybe they're smiling. Maybe for those around Peter, there's not as much tension. And then Jesus stops and he looks at Peter. And they connect eyes. And as they are standing there and Jesus asks the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" In 1963, there was a letter written from a Birmingham jail. Dr. King had been arrested along with a few others for protesting in Birmingham, Alabama. They were arrested for violating rules that had actually been put in place just because of this situation, because the community and the area didn't want anybody kind of out protesting, even if it was a non-violent protest. And Dr. King and others knew that this was kind of a coming to head moment when it was kind of like this clash between the protesters and the government. And as they were protesting the treatment of black people in America, Dr. King was arrested and he was placed in isolation. And the reason was as they were trying to break him. They had hoped that maybe if we isolate him away from everybody else, with no contact, no conversation, that we can break him. And so for days, they left him alone. no conversation, no contact. And finally, on Sunday, they delivered the paper to him. Now, he hadn't had the paper, he hadn't had anything like that in days. But see, this was another attempt to break him, to break his will. And so they delivered the paper to him. And in the paper was a letter written to Dr. King. This letter had been written by numerous pastors and clergy in the area, asking Dr. King if he would stand down and wait. See, they thought that the leadership of the community and the area was changing, and they said, if we just wait, we'll just wait this out, things will kind of naturally change on their own. See, I don't think that the letter from those pastors was written to Dr. King and the rest of those protesting out of hate. But it definitely was not written out of love. See, they wanted to mask and pretend that it was love. See, I believe that the letter was meant to break the spirit and resolve of those protesting was born out of fear. Derwin Gray shared that the opposite of love is not hate. It's actually fear. See, the problem they faced in those community was this fear. It was hate, but the Christian churches were afraid, right? These pastors were afraid, and they had fear in their hearts, and they masked it as love, right? You've experienced that. So you've experienced somebody pretending to love you, but really there's fear behind it. See, the problem we have faced in our communities and our personal lives with God is that we fear what we don't know. We're afraid of what others will think of our lives if we are changed by God into who He has called us to be. See, Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" Because I believe He wanted to restore Peter to something, to a place, but not back to what he was. You see, I think sometimes we think that Jesus was trying to restore or reconcile with Peter to restore him to where he was at, right? But I believe that Jesus was trying to restore Peter to something greater than that. See, Jesus knew that what Peter was going towards, what Peter's future was, he needed not just a restoration vertically with God or with Jesus and Peter, but horizontal restoration, horizontal reconciliation. He needed to be restored to the community around him. You see, God is about vertical restoration, but He's also about the God of horizontal restoration, horizontal reconciliation. See, for many of us, we focus our lives on and our faith on being continually restored to our Messiah, right? That we focus on this relationship of this vertical relationship with God, of this love community with God. But we negate the idea that those around us, that those around us in our communities, in our lives, in our families, we keep blinders on our eyes so we don't see the brokenness around us. We keep blinders on our eyes so that we don't have to see what's going on in the community, that we have these blinders here, that I don't have to see the brokenness of my family, the brokenness that maybe I had a hand in. Brian Loritz, in the book Letters to a Birmingham Jail, says this: if our vertical reconciliation to God required intentionality, then our horizontal reconciliation necessitates the same intentionality. See, what I love about Jesus is that he cuts to the chase. He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't pretend to ask a question. He just goes right after it. See, Peter's been sitting probably on these feelings, this moment for a long time. It's this elephant in the room, the elephant on the beach. It's that awkward hello you continue to give to that person you know you have hurt or has hurt you. But see, Jesus, in a moment of grace and hope, calls Peter and asks him, do you love me? See, I'm not sure if this is the question Peter was waiting for. Or if he would have rather had Jesus just confront him straight up about the denial. But Peter, of course, says, well, of course, Jesus, I love you. You know that I love you. He asks him a second time and a third time. By the third time, Peter almost has to be just exasperated, like, Jesus, you know all things. You know that I love you. But see, there are two types of restoration taking place here for Peter. His personal restoration, this relationship that has been broken with his Messiah, his rabbi, and a communal restoration. See, that he's broken this relationship with those around him. See, in betraying Jesus, in denying Jesus, it was not something that Peter did at home or in the dark, away from those around him in the crowd. See, Peter was front and center in the area waiting outside by Jesus' trial. He was asked 3 times in a community, in the space where others could hear him, if he is a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. And he denies him. See, often we look for the way out in loving others. We try to find a way out of caring for people, caring for those around us, or forgiving people. See, but Jesus doesn't give an out. He does not allow us to love some but not others. See, Jesus restores the brokenness in Peter that he can't heal on his own. For a long time in my life, from time to time, as I would struggle and go through different moments, I would feel that I don't know if I really love God enough. Right? If Jesus would have asked me this question, do you love me? If he would come to me, and there are times when I would say, yeah, I love you, Lord. But if Jesus would come to me, at times maybe in my brokenness and pain and hurt, I might hesitate. And maybe my answer would be, not enough, Jesus. I don't love you enough. See, if he asked me, Ryan, do you love those around you? In all honesty, I may have to hesitate and answer, maybe not enough. Gemma Ryan, in an interview, was quoted saying this. She was talking to an older friend that had followed Jesus for longer, and they were talking to each other, and she told her friend, I just don't feel like I love God enough. Yeah, how do I make myself love God more? And her friend looked at her and said, maybe you have things the wrong way. See, I think you need to get a fresh revelation of how much God loves you. And that can change everything. So I believe that God wants to reconcile us to those in our communities. I think that when he asks us, do you love me? I think we can look back at Matthew 25 when he's telling the stories of the gold and the 10 virgins. And at the end of those three stories, the question is asked, then the question is asked, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or need clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? Do you love me? Then in verse 44 and 45 it says this. They will answer, Lord, when do we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger in need of clothing or sick in prison and didn't help you? When do we see you that way? He will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. Do you love me? See, God, I believe God wants to restore our relationship with our communities. Jesus was asked, what are the two greatest commandments? What did he say? Love God and love others. See, I think he asked Peter if he loved him more than these. Was not because he didn't think that Peter didn't love others, but I think that Peter had this fear inside of him. And I think that's why he denied Jesus in the first place, was a fear, not out of hate. And Jesus wants to expel this fear from him and say, it's simple, Peter. See, it's really simple. I need you, Peter, to love others well. Follow me. I need you to love others well. Feed my sheep. See, he needed to love God with everything first. Well, see, I think as Christians, we can get so caught up with loving Jesus well, loving God well, that we miss the second part of his command. See, Jesus wanted to reconcile Peter to himself. So he asked him 3 times, do you love me? And then 3 times he asked Peter, feed, take care, and feed my sheep. So as Jesus was reconciling him to himself, as he was providing Peter with a vertical restoration, a vertical reconciliation, he was providing a horizontal reconciliation as well. See, God wants to have a vertical restoration with us today. But he also knows that vertical is not enough, that we need to have a horizontal restoration, a horizontal reconciliation with those around us. For some of us, that might be family, or those that were in our certain circle of friends. And for others, it's our communities. See, for the church, we need to live lives and care for the least of these. We need to stand up and stand in the gap for the least of these. We acknowledge that we don't always get it right, but today marks the walk of something different. When I was in seminary, one of my professors asked this. If your church were to be suddenly disappear from your community, plucked out, gone, your church is gone, no more Restore for Marshalltown, would they even notice a difference? The idea is that if you are truly making an impact in your community, if you are truly loving your community well, they should beg you to stay. That if you planned on transferring to another community down the road, that the community you are in should beg you to stay because they know the impact you have on those around you. See if we answer the question of love, the question of, do you love me? And follow his command to take care of his sheep, not just those in the building that you're worshiping in, but all of his sheep. He shares that he would leave the 99 to find the one that was missing. See, if we did this, if we had a vertical reconciliation with God, and we had a horizontal reconciliation with our community, and if we followed what he said when he says at the end of his conversation with Peter, then follow me, our community would feel the impact of our departure. They would beg us to stay. They would ask, what do we need to do to keep Restore here in Marshalltown? One of our passions is that we love Marshalltown, a horizontal love. So the question comes back in this moment, Restore, do you love me? You who are watching this right now, do you love me? Then follow me. Then feed my sheep. Take care of my sheep. Follow me. I don't know where you're at today, what you're going through, what your heart's been hurt of and healing from. Man, if you need this vertical restoration, this vertical reconciliation with God today, just take care of that. Just pray, Lord, I need you today. And then I want you to think of those around you in your family and friends and your community. And maybe there's a horizontal reconciliation, restoration that needs to happen. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep and follow